And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I want to thank Dave. Debuting this week at number 36.
Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above all the low-grade buffoons in the Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another busy broadcast week at Cowboy State Politics. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. I did. But did you watch the parade? Now, I only caught, the bits and pieces of it. I was busy doing something else, so I couldn't actually watch the parade live. But the sound bites and the little sections of video that I saw, I thought it was pretty impressive. And it is yet another military parade in a long string of military parades that we have in this country. I mean, who could forget the iconic pictures that came from the New York City parade after World War II? All of the sailors and GIs coming down through downtown New York City, and all the pictures of them kissing all of the nurses and everybody, and the confetti going around. Well, this is just another example of that. Now, one of the criticisms of the lamestream buffoons in the media is that, well, it happened on Trump's birthday. How dare he arrange a birthday present for himself? It's not his fault that he was born on June 14th, the anniversary of the creation of the U.S. Army. It's not his fault at all that he was born on Flag Day. In fact, one is not responsible for when or with whom your parents decide to copulate. That's not your decision. I hate to break it to you. But really, and here's the thing that I kept thinking. In years past, the Biden administration spent approximately $2 billion a year on military recruiting, and they just barely would meet quotas at the end of the fiscal year. Already, this year, and we're only in June, all of the quotas are met for military recruitment. So if your argument is, well, we spent $40 million on a parade, my question would be, well, yeah, but how much did we save in military recruitment? How much money are we not going to have to expend to send recruiters to all of the far-flung places in this country? Though I think that we probably should. But that parade, in and of itself, was the best recruitment tool that I think the president could have arranged. Now, there are some, as I mentioned, in the lamestream press that are claiming stupid things like, well, we don't have military parades. This is America. We don't have, parades. That's North Korea. That's Putin. That's Russia. They are the ones that have military parades. Except, of course, that this country has almost always had military parades all the way up through the Bush administration. And allow me to prove it to you. This is a video from CBS News. And I'll throw it up on the screen, Ken.
This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. Well, already they are saying tonight it was the biggest military celebration in the nation's capital since World War II, as Washington today honored the U.S. servicemen and women who fought in the Gulf War, both those who returned and those who died. 200,000 enthusiastic spectators watched a parade of troops and their weapons, all part of the national victory celebration. Eric Ingberg has our report.
It was a day for saying thank you to heroes. Fittingly, it began with those who did not come back. At Arlington National Cemetery, President Bush placed a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. And fighter planes passed over in the missing wingman formation to honor the men and women who died in the Gulf War. The president choked back tears several times as he spoke directly to loved ones of those who died.
We celebrate the fact that each person we commemorate today gave up life for principles larger than each of us. Principles that at the same time form the muscle and strength of our national heart.
Eileen Rollins said her son Jeffrey...
So the point here is that we do and have had military parades in this country for a really long time. Agent 29, you were in Desert Storm. Do you remember a military parade?
We had one in Germany.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I was just thinking, though, I lived in Colorado Springs for a long time, was stationed at Fort Carson twice, and every college football game, there's flyover.
Yeah.
And we see that all over. There are a lot of parades in military towns. I know down where Fort Hood is, they have parades on occasion. Whenever there's a normal one, there's usually at least some display. Yeah, I get the point. We don't want to look like a third world dictator out there waving flags and stuff on our chest, but 250 years.
Yeah, 250 years. It's the June 14th. Yes, it is Flag Day, but it's also the birthday of the U.S. Army. But let me just respond to the point you just made. That is the narrative coming from the mainstream press, that we don't want to look like North Korea. Well, that parade did not look like anything that came out of North Korea. Really, it was a celebration of the Army's history. And I mean, when you get down to it, I mean, they had service members dressed in every kind of make and model of uniform since the Revolutionary War. So, I mean, really, it was the complete opposite of what the media was saying.
It could be well argued that North Korea and these other places were actually trying to copy what we did after World War II, and so we have strength too.
No, you are wrong. It is North Korea, and we're copying them. You know, Trump is best friends with Putin. I don't know if you knew that or not. So the reason why I played for you the CBS News report is we don't air news reports like that anymore, and CBS now is one of the more liberal wings of the the media party. And so let's contrast what that report was with, let's see here, play cut number 3. This is PMS, NBC after the parade.
One thing I will say, I want to go back to you, Allie, that again, when we talk about this sort of tension in the country, and sometimes, you and I have both been at Trump rallies, those can be very tense.
Very tense.
A kind of, I would say, like kind of a dark, malevolent
very
energy
dark.
Sometimes in them. Not always, but it doesn't seem like that's the energy on the mall today, which I think is a good sign, right?
Correct. That you're really correct about that, Chris, and it's something we were watching for.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of surprised by the number of people who were at the front of the parade, watching, cheering, and then would come and ask to take a selfie.
Yeah, right.
This is a very different mood here.
Yeah.
People seem to be going out of their way to say that they're here to celebrate the Army's 250th birthday. Now there are people walking around with signs. A moment ago, while you were talking to Jen, guy just came around and said, "Trump 20."
Okay, so the media openly says that, well, we were expecting a dark display. It was going to be very, very dark. All these conservatives, they only think in dark terms. They always use that, right? It's to cast, no pun intended, a shadow over whatever event it is. It's try to create an image in your mind that if you're a conservative, well, then obviously you have evil intentions. because, all conservatives are evil.
Yeah, we try to maintain that facade. I am going on Thursday. I'm going to Du Bois, and we're going to take in the museum there, taking the grandkids to go see the Museum of Military Vehicles. There is something to be said for, and I think maybe we should probably have more of this types of parades, so people have a little bit of better understanding of some of what we have and the capacity or the capabilities of it. There is a certain amount of pride that comes in that, to know, we're not going to step in until we have to, and when we do, we're stepping in well. But I'm also thinking that when you see them up close, I remember the first time I went to the Smithsonian and I looked at the lunar lander.
Yeah.
Or
Super
whichever
cool.
vehicle they splashed down. It wasn't the lander, but inside of that, some of the things in the dashboard, the gauges and whatnot, Stuart Warner gauges, are the same ones we had in the Deuce and a Half.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking at that, and I think it's good to look at some of the military vehicles and realize that people live in those.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other part to think of. You got all this military equipment rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, the tanks and personnel carriers and all of that. How many little kids were standing in the crowd going, "Whoa, that's cool. I want to drive one of those." Or the state-of-the-art fighter jets that flew over, or the squadron of Apache helicopters. How many little kids looked at that and said, "I'm going to fly one of those"?
How many illegal aliens who would do ill to this country were looking at I wonder where I get hands on one of those.
Exactly right. Now, the other point, besides being a recruitment tool, a celebration of the 250 years, if you watched it, and of course, Agent 29, you're going to have to go back and watch some scenes from it. But part of the reason was to give a glimpse to our enemies of what they are facing. Now, it wasn't everything. It wasn't like a giant parade of missiles that you actually would see in North Korea. It was different flashes here. Hey, look at this. Here's our new fighter jet. Oh, there's a tank. Better watch out for that. So, I mean, the parade was for dual purposes. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of things, we had this fantastic parade in Washington, D.C., but we also had the so-called No Kings protest that took place across the country. Now, here's a couple pictures from that parade. Go ahead and throw this up, Ken. All right, so that's from downtown Sheridan. Yeah, we got a veteran there, and these are from the Sheridan Press, by the way. So they're not going to show you the more inexplicable signs that were down there. Now, I've attended several different protests down on Grinnell Plaza, down on Main Street in Sheridan. And the interesting thing about, and I don't know this gentleman right up here, but most of the people that I saw at several different protests were different people. So, or not different people, we're the same people. And this is from The Blaze. Anti-ICE protester exposed as serial left-wing activist since the 1980s. Protested at the Dyke March and against Coca-Cola. And I quote, "The activists justified blocking New York City traffic by saying it was only temporary. Two anti-immigration enforcement protesters who blocked New York City traffic this week have been revealed as longtime activists, with one participating in protests since the 1980s. The two activists were filmed on Tuesday morning blocking Houston Street in Lower Manhattan. Let's see here. I'm trying to find out. Here we go. One activist, identified as Karen Ramspacher, a 60-year-old who was engaged in activism since at least 1989. As the Daily Mail noted, Ramspacher was quoted in the 1989 issue of Out Week magazine about being arrested at an abortion rights protest. So my point is that usually when you have protests on the left, it's usually the same people, and it's the same type of people. So anyway, on the one hand, we had the parade. On the other hand, we had the No Kings protest. But when we return, we're going to talk to one of those people on the Democrat side of things. I'm pretty excited for this. I've got an interview with Representative Trey Sherwood. You're going to love it, and I'll bring it to you next.
U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. I've often said that if you're a Democrat and you have the courage to come on Cowboy State Politics, I'll give you an hour. I'll give you 2 hours. I'll let you have as much time as you want because, let's be honest, this is my program and I can do whatever the heck I want. Well, actually, one of those Democrats took me up on the offer, and it's Representative Trey Sherwood. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do the interview is to just have a conversation with a Democrat. You know, too often we get caught up in our own echo chambers, and it's good to hear the other side. Second, I think that there's a couple of lessons that we can learn here, and the first one is that we can disagree without being disagreeable. That we can have fundamental disagreements on principles, on policy, on a whole bunch of things, but we don't have to be at each other's throats. So yesterday, I sat down, well, actually, it was over Zoom, but I visited with Representative Trey Sherwood. She's a Democrat out of Laramie, and she's one of the only 6 Democrats in the House. So the interview runs about 40 minutes long, and I'm just going to play it from beginning to end for you. It's a fun interview, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So here we go. First Democrat on the program. But really, when I look back on it, that guy, I don't know if he was a Democrat or if he was a Republican or what he was. But I do now have the very first Democrat representative on the program, and that's Representative Trey Sherwood. Representative, welcome to Cowboy State Politics.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be in conversation with you.
So first question everybody gets on this show is, why don't you just take a minute or two and tell me about yourself?
Wonderful. So I have been here in Laramie for 20 years. Prior to that, I still am a proud Air Force brat. My dad was in the service. We moved around quite a bit. And that's where I learned that it was okay to walk up to a neighbor and say hello and offer, a shared meal. That change was hard, but I could be adaptable, and the power of taking care of each other in community. 2009, I went through Leadership Wyoming, and that really is what gave me the passion for everything that makes Wyoming tick. It's a great opportunity just to fall in love with everything from our military service to how things work in Cheyenne, to education, to oil and gas. Great overview. And so at that point, I was like, I want to run for office. I want to give back. I want to serve. And so I would say I come from a long line of people who just love community and love giving back, and am very blessed to have found my place here in Laramie, Wyoming.
Okay. So you live in Laramie. Are you married? Do you have any kids?
Yes, I have an amazing husband, 6th generation Wyomingite. He's taught me how to hunt and fish and do all the outdoorsy stuff that I didn't get to do growing up. No kiddos, but we have a lot of furry animals running around the homestead. But yeah, and then my day job, I'm an economic developer. I work with Laramie Main Street, so I get to cheerlead for all of our entrepreneurs that decide to open businesses in our historic district. So I have 300 locally owned businesses that I walk alongside, as they're opening, growing, expanding, going through those ups and downs. It's my job to get them the resources they need.
Right. Excellent. Now, you're kind of in an interesting position in the legislature. You are a Democrat in Wyoming in the House. We've only got 6 of you guys. But you are the lone Democrat on House appropriations, along with Agent 29. And you sit pretty close to him, so every once in a while, I hope that you slap him upside the back of the head. So I guess the first question I have for you, Trey, is just generally speaking, what's it like to be the lone Democrat on appropriations? I mean, you got a lot of people there that are pretty conservative, that are big fans of cutting government, and, well, you're a Democrat, so not such a big fan of doing that. So talk to me about this. What's that like?
No, thanks for the question. And one, I should say that being on appropriations is an amazing opportunity to learn the ins and outs of all of our state agencies. And so I love that opportunity to hear from our agency directors who are super passionate about their work and what they do and how they're serving our constituents. So just wanted to, throw that in there, that there's this big picture view of what's going on in the state. And then we get into the details of the budget, which I always love to say is a reflection of our shared values in terms of, how we allocate those resources. So my job as an appropriator and as a Democrat on the appropriator is to ask those questions about shared values. So if we're talking about making a cut, I get to be the one to say, like, what does this do if we lose this resource? And is that something we all value, or is that something we see has, run its course, or is no longer serving our constituents? And so I like to say that I get to be the person at the table that asks the questions that nobody else is asking. And it's really, I didn't think that I would enjoy being the underdog, because I love collaborating.
Right.
But the reality is that even as the underdog, I'm still get a seat at the table. I still get to dialogue with my colleagues. I'm just asking the question that nobody else is asking. And I think that that's a good, appropriate role as we think about balancing out, how we budget our taxpayer dollars.
So I'm wondering, Trey, are we the jerks that we're purported to be?
Not at all. I have really found, at least on the House side, because I don't know my Senate colleagues as well, that we do operate like a family. Families have times where they come together and they take care of each other. So if somebody is sick or going through a struggle, there's grace there. And we're like, how can we help? And then there's times like a family where we fight with each other and we disagree, but we do that in a respectful, civil way. So I love serving in appropriations just because everybody is very kind, very curious, very willing to share their viewpoint in a way that creates dialogue instead of shuts down the conversation. So I feel like I get to be on the best committee, out of all of them.
I think it's the best committee too. And I do want to say that one of the reasons it's a good committee is you. You do a great job. You're very well researched. You always know exactly what's going on. And I'm kind of jealous of that sometimes, but thanks for coming on the show today, and I'll get out of the way.
Yeah. No. I really wish you would, Agent 29. Go ahead.
We do pass notes to each other, right? So if it's like there's a conversation going on and maybe we're not getting the answer that we were looking for, if one of us sitting around that dais has more information, we're gonna pause and share that with each other. So I do think that there's an obligation to help empower the folks around you so that everyone has the information. And now what we do with that information and the decision we make, that's individually how we represent our communities. But to say there is a shared value in making sure that, nobody's left in the dark, and when it's time to vote, they're missing information. So
I guess the next question I have for you is, you were on appropriations when the folks that were in charge of the House of Representatives were decidedly more, how do I want to put this? Well, let's just be honest. They were a little bit more liberal than the current leadership is. And I think that if you looked at the numbers before Chairman Bear and Agent 29 took over, we created the biggest budget in Wyoming history. And this past session, and certainly the session coming up, you've experienced a bunch of folks that don't want to spend that much money. So how do you, as a Democrat, and you've got different priorities than Republicans, how do you as a Democrat navigate those priorities when you went from being able to spend a little bit of money to a bunch of people that don't like to spend money? So for you as a Democrat, how do you make your way through that?
Yeah, so it really comes down to just being open with communication and being aware of how that maybe a cut would impact my community. So one, being engaged in my community, touring, say, Interfaith or ARC, or local social services, listening to them about how where their resources are coming from. Are they being cut? Are they being backfilled by maybe charitable gifts? And so having a lay of the land before we go into the budget and understanding if the budget is cut, what does that do for services on the ground here in Albany County? If the budget is sustained, how are those monies being used to serve my constituents? So knowing that information going into it and then being able to verbalize that and sharing it with the other members to say, you may not like this program, but this is how it's working on the ground in Laramie. This is how it's benefiting our hardworking community members. This is how it's providing a hands up or whatever. So we may not, again, at the end of the day, we may not agree, but for me, it's about having the ability to translate what does that cut mean to our neighbors, to our constituents, and then being able to verbalize that with real life examples.
Well, now, so let's talk about some of those cuts for a minute. Senate File 69, before that thing passed, you would have thought that the world was going to come crashing down amongst our ears, and we were going to have to fire policemen and fire firemen. But in the final analysis, there were some counties that took a pretty sizable cut. Sheridan, it was, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but I think it was like 6%. Other counties, not so much. So how were you able to manage that conversation with your constituents in telling them the reality of what Senate File 69 actually did?
So that's a great question. I also feel like it's my job as bills are being discussed or proposed to be able to factually say, what does this bill do, and lay it out. And if you look back at my social media, hopefully you're seeing that, like, what's in the budget bill? And I've got, bullet points. What does this bill do? Bullet points. And so I think it's really valuable to take that time during session, even though we're all very busy, to communicate out, like, what does this bill really do? And then let constituents read that and then respond of like, I like it, I don't like it, I'm worried about this, whatever it is. I'd say we're still navigating on the ground. And actually at the branding yesterday, I had questions about how will the reduction in property taxes impact our water conservation district? And so I had a rancher come up to me with those questions, which is great. I love being in dialogue. And so I still think that we're like, what we thought was going to happen and then what we're seeing on the ground is still playing out. And my constituents are very concerned about the results of this bill, right? But our local government budgets really aren't final until July 1st.
Right.
So we're close to kind of seeing how it all washes out, but it is a popular topic at, in the grocery store aisles, at the branding, at, the park.
Sure.
And there's still some worry about it.
Well, and I don't, I think you put it right, that really it's still kind of playing out. and people are still figuring out their budgets, and so really you don't know what the actual effects are going to be, good or bad, until it actually plays out. So I want to kind of switch gears with you for a little bit and talk about some specific issues. But before I get there, just one general question. One of the major criticisms of folks on our side, or I guess for you it would be the other side, is that they get their talking points from Washington, D.C., that some puppet master in an office in Washington is sending them messages every day, and that's how they're supposed to vote. So my question for you is, does the national Democrat agenda play into, if at all, and how much does it play into your work in the legislature? I mean, do you guys look at the national agenda and say, okay, we got to do these priorities, or do you kind of do your own thing?
Yeah, I think that is the freedom of being the underdog, is that we don't have a okay. Yes, I am a Democrat. I think a Wyoming Democrat is a very different thing than what we perceive as DC Democrat. I think that we are more grounded in our communities and the reality of what our communities need to be successful, right? So going back to hard work and public lands and honest interactions. So while there may be a social agenda going on in DC, if that's not something my constituents are asking me to address, I'm not going to spend my time on it. If my constituents are like, I'm worried about funding for public schools, that's where I'm going to spend my time. So again, grounded in how we can best serve our communities, knowing that, here in Albany County, I'm in a red district, but the county in itself is purple, which is my favorite color. So the community's needs are going to be different, right, than what's going on in maybe, larger urban centers across the United States. So no, I think that's the freedom in being like small in number underdog, is that we all have individual freedom to make our own decisions based on what's best for our constituents.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those issues, right? One of your big things is affordable housing. And this is one that you and I, we are not on the same side on this one, but I want to give you a chance to just make your case, and then maybe we'll do a little bit of back and forth. So I guess my first question for you, as it relates to affordable housing, what is it that the government should do that it's not doing now, in your opinion?
Thank you for that question. And I wouldn't say not. I would just say we're like dipping our toe in the water, but we're not yet seeing like the results or the fruition. So at the local level, so at the state level, this is something I've advocated for, but here in my community, I founded the Albany County Housing Coalition, and it's a group of folks from the hospital and the banking community and developers and realtors and teachers, all of us getting together saying like, collectively as a community, what can we do to make sure that people moving into our community for jobs have a place that they can afford to live? And when you talk about the definition of affordable, it's essentially saying nobody should be paying more than 30% of their income on their home. So whether it's rent or mortgage, their utilities, whatever, because otherwise it's considered cost burden. And it's hard to then invest in your child's education or put money into savings, right? If so much of your paycheck is going to your house. So just a quick plug for how we define affordable here in these conversations. So going to like, what is the role? So there's a role for private industry to play. There's a role for community to play. But again, going back to how much I love collaboration, I believe local government and state government should be doing a few things. One, looking at where our regulations are getting in the way and making it harder to build houses and removing those constraints. But I also believe very much in that infrastructure is a shared public good, right? So like road, water, sewer, utilities, sidewalks, lighting, all of those things that are not individually owned. Like I don't own the sidewalk in front of my, actually I don't have a sidewalk, but I'm in the county, right? I'm on a dirt road. But so to say that like that homeowner doesn't own the street in front of them, that's a public asset. So I do believe that an appropriate role of government is to invest in that infrastructure. So if you have a wide open field that the community has determined this would be good for housing, I do think it's an appropriate role for the city or the state to have funds to invest in going back to roads, water, sewer, curb, gutter, sidewalks, lighting. So
okay, so hold on. Now, there's a difference between a street that is, one of the things that I consider like the proper role of government. And in my perspective, from my perspective, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct on this one. The role of government is just to do a few things like roads. It'd be nice to have some police. I kind of think that's a good thing. Fire protection, yeah. I don't like things burning down. You got to have some administration, right? But really, like, the role of government is pretty small. So, in my opinion. So my question for you is, where is it written? Where is it explained? Is it in the Constitution? Where is it that it's the role of government to help provide somebody an affordable house?
No, I think there's a social contract, right? We pay our taxes, right?
Okay.
And then that pot of money is like, how do we have the greatest good in using those funds? And for us in Albany County, the number one barrier to economic development, which creates wealth for individuals, is housing. We can't get businesses to move here because their workers can't afford to live here. These are people with high degrees working technical jobs who cannot afford a house in our community. So again, social benefit, I don't think that it would be egregious to that social contract for the city of Laramie or for the state to have a pot of money that's like, we will build out the roads so that the private developer can come in and put in those houses. Again, private-public partnerships. Love it, love it, love it. So that we can have good paying jobs for our hardworking citizens.
Okay, so you're going to love this next question. So one of my big arguments against any sort of this public-private partnership is that the government ends up picking winners and losers. And by that, I mean, you may select this contractor over this one. It's anytime, in my opinion, that the government gets involved in the private sector, you see a bunch of favoritism happening. And so with this affordable housing thing, how is it that you prevent that sort of favoritism, picking winners and losers? How is it that you stop it being this alliance between public officials and their favorite contractor?
That's a great question. And I'm like, isn't that why we have a bid system in place, right? Or like a sealed bid. I know in our community, you put in your proposal and you don't include your costs. Like, that's totally separate. And the selection committee, which our community here in Laramie often has members of the community as part of the selection committee. So it's not 100%, government employee looking through those. So there's a ranking system. And then once they have their top person, then they open the sealed bid with the dollar amount. So they're not being chosen either on like low bid, but on qualification and the capacity or ability to do the job. So I think there's a process in place. And now, while is every community using the same process? I don't know. That's a good question, right?
Oh, wait, I got another one for you. But Agent 29 wants to weigh in here.
So
here we go.
Yeah, I want to tell you a little bit of a story when I was in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
At the Air Force Academy, they came into a situation where they needed a kitchen pretty fast. They had a new incoming kind of a vice commandant, and they needed it in a hurry, and we just happened to be able to shuffle our schedule. I was a contractor at that point, to be able to go provide that kitchen. Well, if you work for the federal government, it's not that different working for state. There are all kinds of hoops you got to go through, all kinds of extra paperwork, whatever. Anyway, we got all those things done. We got ourselves certified, understood the ropes, et cetera, et cetera. The next kitchen that they needed, they basically gave to us, and the third one they gave to us as a no-bid contract, because having had experience with a number of other contractors, they knew what we delivered. We knew we delivered on time, and they knew it was going to be at a fair price.
Okay, fair enough. That worked out there. But when I look at that, I think, man, there is an opportunity for graft and corruption there, and it's just part of the issues. There's two sides to every story, and there's two sides to every argument. Go ahead.
Ken, thank you for that example. So yeah, it sounds like that's a fine line between going back to that contractor who is ethical, affordable, hardworking. You know you're going to get a good product, but then that appears maybe to be favoritism, and somebody else is like, how do I even get in? So yeah, there's a lot of gray in our world.
All right, so this next question is kind of one of the central conservative questions, and that is, and I'm going to give you an example and to back this up, but why is it the government's job to be charitable? The only way that the government can be charitable is by taking other people's money and giving it to somebody else, whether you need a house or a car or whatever. I mean, in my opinion, in this scenario, it's not going to stop at houses. And so here's the specific example. If it is the government's role to help with affordable housing, as you say, how do you stop situations like housing mitigation fees that are happening in Jackson and in other parts of the state, where the central government, the city or the county, is literally taking other people's money to build affordable, so-called affordable housing for other people? And it is a straight up private property rights issue, if you ask me. So how do you prevent that sort of scenario when it literally is taking people's money to build houses for somebody else?
So there's got to be a level of transparency in that. And I guess my example back to you is like, I don't have children, but my taxes go to pay for other people's children's education, right? So again, that greater good, that shared value, that I have no problem paying taxes that benefit our public schools to make sure that we have an educated workforce, because I know that when I'm a retiree sitting in the nursing home, I want the best nurse possible there checking on me. And that goes back to an investment in education. I don't see it. I mean, you could also use the example of like when you decide to tithe to your church, right? So you're contributing to the greater good, the work that the church is doing. I don't always benefit directly from then how our church council decides to spend those money, but I know that my community is benefiting from that.
Well, the difference being, of course, that a church is a private organization, that people they voluntarily give their money to the church, and government isn't involved in there. And then the other one, of course, with education, well, education's in the Constitution. I mean, I would argue that we shouldn't have done that, but regardless, it's in the Constitution. Whereas I don't think it says anywhere in there that we ought to be providing a house for somebody.
No, I think that's a great question. And maybe that goes back to like how broadly you interpret life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I would argue to say that if you're an uneducated, if you're hungry, and if you're not housed, how can you have a fulfilling life? How can you contribute back to society if your greatest concern is where am I going to shelter tonight and have a roof over my head and feed my family? Like you're not able to contribute back to the community when you're worried about those basic necessities.
Oh, trust me, I am terrified at the thought that some of these young people are going to be running the country when I'm old and gray. I mean, it terrifies the crap out of me. Well, let me switch gears on you a little bit, and this is something you mentioned earlier on at the beginning of our interview, that you're kind of interested in history, sort of a history buff, just like me. What do you make of the controversy that's going on with the Wyoming Historical Society, that they're splitting the sheets with their countings, and what do you make of that whole thing?
Oh my God, it breaks my heart. So I used to be the president of our local Albany County Historical Society, and then I was a board member at the state level as well. Again, because it's like if you're a history buff, you want to be around other history buffs.
Well,
and
yeah.
Geek out. So yeah, I mean, just reading through the controversy and the split, it really is sad. I think at a time where our resources are strained, we should be breaking down silos and coming together and forming tighter collaborations instead of splitting resources. So I think that it's not a great move to split from your funding source, your foundation. And as somebody who runs a nonprofit, I would say like that was shocking to me to see. Obviously, I'm now an outsider looking in, so there are probably details that I don't have, and want to give people grace, right, as they're trying to navigate, not an ideal situation in terms of, new leadership, trying to build energy and new direction around an organization. But it does seem quite messy, and it makes me quite sad as a former board member.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that one. I really haven't looked into what's going on, but the whole thing seems pretty messy. And I do happen to know a couple of the people that are on the board, and I do mean to go talk to them. But from everything I've seen in the news reports, it's kind of a messy situation. There's one more topic I want to talk with you on, and guns. Here's why I bring it up. So I was in the Appropriations Committee, I guess it was 2 years ago, when that year's version of the repeal of gun-free zones came up. And you had a very interesting argument in the committee. So I have two questions here. The first one is, why don't you just tell me generally, as a Democrat, you personally, what's your view on guns? And then I'll ask you the second question.
Oh, yeah. So again, I go back to Wyoming Democrats. I hunt. Thankfully, my husband's very patient teacher, right? So I pheasant hunt, antelope hunt. I'm going elk hunting this year. And so I mean, I didn't grow up around guns, but after taking hunter safety, I was like, oh, this is why you have them. And this is how you tell if one is loaded and the safety's on or off or whatever. So my comfort level is much enhanced after that class. I feel like it's so ingrained in Wyoming's who we are as a society and who we are as people, that it's one of our shared values is the ability to have a gun, and whether you use that for hunting or recreation or self-defense, I don't have an issue, with responsible gun ownership.
Okay, so then the second question is directly related to the repeal of gun-free zones. My position is, I think it's absolutely safer if you have a good guy with a gun than if not. So what is your position on House Bill 172, the repeal of gun-free zones?
Well, now I'm curious. What did I say 2 years ago that was so interesting?
Well, the argument you made is essentially what you just said, is that, I love guns, but I don't necessarily think that they need to be in schools. And I mean, the whole of your argument was, look, there's limitations on all rights. No right is absolute. And you just made the argument that, hey, I think that this is one of those limitations. And, the reason that I found it interesting is some of the Democrats that I listen to for my show on a daily basis, they're absolutely not in favor of the Second Amendment in any way, shape, or form. So I found it interesting that generally speaking, you're in favor of it, but with restrictions. And so as it relates to 172, okay, come July 1st, you can carry a gun in a school. What's your opinion of it?
I think that Representative Haraldson worked really hard to make that bill better, that he did a really good job of listening to concerns. And so I just wanted to say, thank you. Even if we have policy that we're not, 100% agreement on, I can always respect somebody who works hard to make a piece of law better. So just wanted to say that. The second time around, that bill was more considerate. I would say my concerns with guns in schools is safety, training. Again, do you have somebody who's responsible gun owner, who's respectful, who understands how their weapon works, how to keep that weapon safe? And I do worry too about the erosion of local control. So those districts that already had policies in place, like up in Cody, right? They created it based on what their community and their teachers and their parents wanted. But I also worry about our first responders, going into a situation where the person with the gun is always going to be perceived as the bad guy. And I'm concerned about that sort of crossfire where it was that was a parent or a teacher and they're not identified. And that we may experience some sort of emergency response situation where somebody gets shot who was trying to be helpful.
Fair enough. Just a quick question. I'm kind of a statistics nut. Can you tell me how many school shootings there have been in a school where the teachers are armed?
Yeah, I don't have that data in front of me, right? Zero.
Zero.
You're saying zero. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I have this conversation with,
Wait, have we had any shootings in Wyoming?
Yeah, we have, actually. There was one right here in Sheridan. The thing about it is, though, it was outside, and really, the gun-free zone, I guess, yeah, it kind of applied, but 172 wouldn't have changed any of that. It was a guy outside and shooting onto, wasn't it the football field, Ken?
Yeah, it was Central Junior High School at the time, which was my junior high school.
Yeah.
But it wasn't me.
Yeah. So anyway, that pretty much.
Good to know, Ken.
So I guess the last question I have for you, is there anything that you want to talk about?
I don't know. I guess if we were live, we could be taking questions.
Maybe we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
Here's a suggestion. Get your friend Carly to come on, and we'll do a live show and take questions. I think it'd be a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and people will come up and they want to talk, and I'm like, be as honest as you want, be as raw. Don't feel like you have to have polished questions. We are here to be accessible to you, as constituents. And so if somebody is like, hey, I watched this, what a weirdo, or whatever. I have questions for that random Democrat, like reach out, to me directly, or CC Ken, and we can have dialogue together. So,
well, and I think that's the most important part, because I'm one of those people that think if we had a stronger Democrat Party in Wyoming, that it would actually help not only our politics, but help the conversation. I mean, and too often I think that we end up being in this giant echo chamber. Though, I would argue that really there are a whole bunch of your brethren that are hiding out in the Republican Party. But stronger.
They haven't revealed themselves to me, if that makes you feel better.
I want to go back to the gun issue. That's one of my favorite ones. And the Wyoming Constitution says quite clearly that the right of citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and of the state, which the schools are property of the state, shall not be denied. Seems pretty cut and dried to me. And so I look at even the concessions that Representative Haraldson had to make in order to get this bill through. We took a step in the right direction. But I look at them as unconstitutional. And so my question is, how do you respond to the idea that in a recent conversation with a bunch of people who are not very fond of getting rid of gun-free zones, I said, your problem really isn't with me. It isn't with the law. Your problem's with the Constitution. If you got an issue, then you need to go back and fix the Constitution. Any thoughts?
So it goes back to like that foundational shared values, right? To like go back to 1890, we became a state. We put that in our Constitution. I think that question encourages a lot of reflection, which is good if people are willing to like pause and take the emotion out of it, and say that was a shared value in 1890. Really, 250 years ago, it was a shared value, right? Is that still where we are as a society today? And I would argue in Wyoming, yes. But then what is the discomfort, right? Like having those, more in-depth conversation, moving away from talking points to say, why is it that we had to talk about guns in preschool, right? Like why did Jeremy Haraldson have to navigate around that issue? Why did he have to offer concessions for schools or UW? So I think we need to spend more time in deep, curious conversation with one another outside of the emotions of our legislative session to understand like why we feel like we're such at odds with this basic right. But I would imagine that parents and teachers and folks who were against it were saying it's my basic right to ensure that my child is safe, right? And so what happens when you have a shared value of a basic right that feels like it's in conflict with another basic right?
Well, So I do have one more question, as it turns out. One of the related to guns, anyway. One of the things that I've been noticing is that after the passage of House Bill 172, which clearly lays out some training stuff, should a county or school district decide they want training, well, that bill lays it out pretty clearly. And one of the things we're seeing, though, is school districts step way beyond what the legislation says. So, for example, the legislation says 16, if you want to, you could require 16 hours of live fire training. And I mean, it's pretty specific how that's to happen. Well, down in Natrona County, they passed a policy that said we're going to require 56 hours of training, which is, you've been around guns enough to know that 56 hours of live fire training is a crap load. So my question for you is, as a member of the legislature, now maybe you agreed with the bill, maybe you didn't agree with the bill, but you guys passed it anyway. And school districts are going way beyond what you guys decided. So as a member of the legislature, how would you respond to Natrona County that's requiring stuff that's clearly not in the statute?
And as a legislature, to me, that's a signal that we need further finesse that piece of legislation, right? So if we're seeing such differences across communities,
All right. Well, we cut the interview short a little bit, unfortunately. So I hit a wrong button. See, I do stuff that's wrong every once in a while, but that's pretty well the end of the interview. Go ahead and shoot me an email. Tell me what you thought of the whole conversation. The email address that I want you to send it to is theshow@cowboystatepolitics.com. You can just email me there any comments that you have, and actually any comments you have in general about the show. Doesn't have to be just about this episode or about any of it, but just go ahead and send me a note and let me know what you think, and or any comments, complaints, whatever. I'll consider it. But we're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we're going to try to take some calls, and we'll discuss what happened during the interview, as well as my cutting it off prematurely. There was only 2 minutes left. Give me a break. We'll be back in a minute. It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know, it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election. Siberia, Nova Scotia. I'm definitely moving to Canada. Straight to hell. Iceland, France. Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy state politics is only going to get stronger. You know, we started out at 36 on the list of the 100 podcasts you should listen to. Now we're up to 33. I mean, there's no telling where this program is going to go. You can listen and watch the program on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. And don't forget about the Cowboy State Politics podcast, which is published every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. You can listen to that. Well, the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. Welcome back to the program, my friends. The phone lines are open. If you want to be part of the program, if you want to respond to my interview with Representative Sherwood, go ahead and give me a call. The phone number here in the Cowboy State Politics studio is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. I know we got a bunch of people watching today's show, so if one of you wants to give me a ring, opine about something that's on your mind, go ahead and give me a buzz. The phone number, again, is 307-374-8989. All right, so...
If nobody calls, we know you just did a splendiferous job and there's nothing left to say.
There you go. That's exactly my opinion. Anytime I don't get any phone calls, well, you know, really, there's just no way to argue because I'm right, they're wrong, and that's the end of the story. So what did you think of the interview with Representative Sherwood? I'll tell you my impressions of the whole thing after watching it again. And, you know, I should probably tell you this. When I do an interview with somebody, even I have to go back and kind of watch it again, listen to it again, and digest what was said. And I think, you know, after listening to the whole interview again, what you saw is the fundamental difference between conservatives and Democrats. Now, conservatives believe that the Constitution says what it says, it means what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say, that it's the four corners of the document, and that really we don't get to inject what we think or what we believe into it. Democrats, on the other hand, they believe in this crazy idea of a living constitution, that it has to evolve with the times, that it's changeable, that it's malleable. And I think that leads you down into some really dangerous territory.
I think there's another thing that kind of became evident. You notice how often she referred to the collective.
Yes.
It's important to the
Yes.
community. It's shared values and all of this. That runs contrary to my own way of thinking, which is more of at the risk of being disenfranchised by some, the rugged individualist. You know, you are primarily responsible for yourself, and you take care of yourself, and only when you have taken care of yourself are you not going to be a burden on everybody else around you. And it's interesting, if I were going to have a prolonged conversation with her, that's the direction I would go, because she actually makes allusions to the value of that.
Yes.
And so you start to break this apart. What's more important, the collective or the individual?
And I think that's a salient point. And I think that's one of those things that flows from this idea of a living constitution. And, you know, several times Representative Sherwood went back to what you were saying, Agent 29, about about collectivism, the social contract, the pursuit of happiness. And it is the fundamental difference between today's Democrat Party and conservatives. Like you say, we believe in individualism. We believe in rugged individualism, responsibility, taking charge of your own life. Democrats, on the other hand, they don't think like that. They look at things in terms of the collective. And I think when you look at a lot of the Democrat policies that are being pushed now, it very much is this idea of socialism, collectivism, that it is the community. You know, it takes a community. Oh yeah, yeah, it takes a village. Oh, barf. But a couple of things that I really wanted to bring back up is this idea of affordable housing. That somehow, some way, somewhere, you are entitled to a nice, comfy place to live. I don't think you are. I think that is completely up to you. That is your responsibility to provide for yourself and your community. Now, should we give you the opportunity to create a good and comfortable living for yourself? Absolutely. But the thing is, everyone has an equal opportunity to do that. It's not my job to give you a house or an apartment or whatever, or a rabbit cage. I'll explain that in just a second. What do you got, Ken?
Well, another fallacy that underlines this is that somehow we can make the world a safe place.
Yeah, no.
That the world is not safe, in part because of sinful man that is within it. Look at the very early on, murder came into play.
Really early.
Yeah. It's just this whole idea that we can be safe and this convenient lie. Now, we came together as a society to make communities in order as a collective to help keep each other safe, so that you got to sleep sometimes, so while you're asleep somebody else is alert, and that sort of game. But I go back to that fundamental idea: which is more important, the individual or the society? And you can't have you can't have a society without individuals.
Right.
They want to have a society without individuals, and we've seen movies, we've read books, we've watched it lived out across the face of the earth, what that comes to.
Yeah, and I think that the other implication that you can draw from this is that, and maybe it's not an implication, but it's more of a I don't know, a description of what's going on here. But Democrats and conservatives have two completely different worldviews. It's not just how we look at the Constitution. It's how we look at the world in general. Most Democrats would say that the ends kind of justify the means, right? That if we can create a society in which the community, the collective, is comfortable and everybody has something to eat and they're safe and everything, well, that's what we should do, regardless of how you get there. Conservatives, we have the opposite worldview, that we would never argue that the ends justify the means. For us, how we get to a goal is at least as important, or sometimes more important, than how we get there. We would never want to win a game by cheating. I mean, that's not winning at all. We would never want to, secure rights for anybody at the expense of somebody else's rights. I mean, it is
speak for yourself.
It's a fundamental difference in our worldview. And I thought, all told, I thought it was a fascinating interview. Oh, one more thing that's on my list here. Actually, two more things. You heard Representative Sherwood say, well, it's the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so that's in the preamble to the Constitution. That's not in the enumerated powers. That's not in the Bill of Rights. That's nowhere in there. It's in the preamble. And so you have an equal opportunity to pursue happiness. That doesn't mean that happiness is guaranteed. That's up to you.
I do have to say, working with Trey has been a pleasure.
Oh, that interview was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
She's always well informed. She's usually wrong, but she's well informed. And that has to do with that fundamental worldview that's there. But I really appreciate open dialogue, differing opinions. We can start to get down peaceably and try to find out what really fundamentally is the difference. And I may not ever have to agree with you, but I want to be able to understand why you think the way you think.
Yeah.
And I think in her case and in some others, and I would throw Carly Provenza in that too, I've been able to
that
understand.
That would be a fun interview.
Well, I look forward to it. Just to be able to understand where somebody's coming from and understand why they think the way they do is very, very valuable. My problem comes in when people think that way and then try to tell the public or pass themselves off to the public as somebody who thinks like I do.
See, and there's, okay, so I'm glad you brought that up because I have way more respect for Representative Trey Sherwood than I do for some of these redcoats. Because Trey and there's a few others in the legislature. I think Carly is one of them. Mike Yen is one of them. They are who they say they are. I mean, you don't have to ask where they are ideologically. You don't have to ask where they're at on policy. They're Democrats. I mean, they're honest about who they are. I have way more respect for that than I do some of the the way I put it in the interview, her Democrat brethren that are hiding in the Republican Party. And there are a lot of those. When you vote with the Democrats 80% of the time, if you're 80% of anything, that kind of means that you're that thing. I mean, it's you smell like paper. No, I shouldn't even go there. I was going to say you smell like that 80% of the time. It kind of means that's what you are. But anyway, two more things that I wanted to bring up. One more. I mentioned the pursuit of happiness thing, but you heard Representative Sherwood bring up this idea of the social contract. Okay, thank God we don't have Rousseau's social contract as our Constitution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was, to put it simply, a socialist. And if you read the social contract, many, many of the things that show up in Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto could be taken, if not word for word, pretty darn close to what Rousseau wrote in the social contract. Now, I guess you could have the political theory that, all right, maybe we do have some sort of social contract with our government, but really, in America, that contract is the Constitution. You don't get to add to it. And this goes back to the first point that I made, that the Constitution is not a living document. It says what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say.
I think I always like to try to boil things down to the very beginning. There is an ideal within Christianity of a common collective, where we look out for each other, we esteem each other, we value each other, we love each other. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, that sort of thing. But in order for that to happen, in my view, it has to be centered on God. It has to be centered on his values.
Sure, absolutely.
What socialism attempts to do, what communism attempts to do, is the same thing, but leave God out of it. And when you leave God out of it, it's not going to happen, because every imagination of a man's heart is only evil continually.
Oh, the heart is exceedingly wicked, and who could know it?
Yeah, so that leads us back to, if you want to have a free society, it has to be a moral society. I have to have a reason to esteem you of more value than myself, and by nature, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the other thing that I would add to that is that it is your individual choice to take part in that community, that we come together and we form towns and counties and states and countries, but you do so through your individual choice to join that group. And Ken just said, hey, should we go to a break? And I shook my head. No, I'm not done yet. The point being is that it is individualism versus collectivism. And anytime you go down the road of collectivism, you end up trampling on somebody else's rights. And the housing mitigation fees that I brought up is a perfect example. Remember, I asked Representative Sherwood point blank, isn't this where this leads? To theft of somebody else's property and money. And the answer was, well, I think that there has to be some transparency. Well, I agree. We have to have transparency when you're stealing my money and giving it to somebody else. But that doesn't solve the core issue, is that no one is entitled to the fruits of your labor. You don't get to steal from somebody and give it to somebody else.
Yeah, remember that she equated that to a tithe to a church,
which is private,
completely voluntary as well. Yeah.
Yep, which we brought up. So anyway, fascinating interview. Trey, you're welcome back on the program anytime you like. And we were being totally serious about you and Carly joining the show. And we'll set that up, and the whole plan, just to kind of give you a little roadmap what we're thinking on that one is, we'll set it up. We'll try to get some people lined up to take some live calls. and we'll just have the debate, and you can have two different perspectives. And here's the thing, right? We can disagree with each other without being disagreeable. You listen to 40 minutes of the program, and there were a couple of times where I flat told her, you and I are not on the same page here, that we do not agree. But if you notice, the entire conversation was pretty cordial, and I think it was beneficial for both of us.
She and I don't agree similarly on a lot of things, but guess who it was that brought me a birthday cake?
It's Representative Sherwood.
Thanks, Trey.
It was funny during the legislative session. I was doing an interview with Representative Bear, and Chris Knapp was there, and Tony Locke was there, and we were in the Appropriations Committee room. It was pretty late at night after the session, and Representative Sherwood came in. We're doing the interview, and I said, "Trey, come on, have a seat. Come on and sit down." And she just kind of looked at me like, I don't know. No, I gotta go. It was funny. Anyway, thanks for the interview, Trey. I really appreciate it, and we'll do it again. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. When we come back, we're going to hit this whole thing of Trump and Israel and what America's place in it ought to be. We'll do that when we come back. It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know, it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election. Siberia, Nova Scotia. I'm definitely moving to Canada. Straight to hell. Iceland, France. Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Welcome back to the program, my friends. Cowboy State Politics. I'm David Iverson, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. Doing what I was born to do each and every day with talent given to me by God himself. Welcome back to the show, my friends.
You forgot with half your brain tied behind your back.
Yeah, I'm getting there. You can only plagiarize Rush,
That's
in
right.
little pieces. You gotta be careful how much you throw out there. So over the weekend there was a bunch of Israel news. Of course, there's a war going on between Israel and Iran, and a lot of different people have a lot of different opinions on this. I too have my own thoughts, as you might have guessed. But let me just kind of give you some of the quick updates, and then we'll get into some of the politics of it. So over the weekend, Trump put out a tweet, or I guess it's not a tweet anymore, but a post on Truth Social, and it said, yeah, here it is. Here we go. Throw this up there. So Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign. What a shame. And a waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should evacuate Tehran immediately, or immediately evacuate Tehran. Okay, so question is, why did he say that? Could be for a number of reasons. The first being, Israel is about to bomb them into the Stone Age if they aren't doing so already. Or it could signal something else. Right now, the U.S. really isn't involved except in defense of Israel. I've seen some reports that a U.S. destroyer was knocking down drones and cruise missiles, which I'm sure that's one of their favorite pastimes if they're on a big ship out in the ocean. Hey, it's target practice. It's like shooting trap and skeet, except there's much bigger booms. So Trump says, get the heck out of Tehran.
I was just going to say, shooting, trap, and skeet. I'm really excited for FedEx to start using drones to deliver packages here in town.
Oh, yeah.
Skeet shooting with
it's going to be
prizes, right?
fantastic. When I lived in Buffalo, somebody tried to fly a drone over my house, so I put out a post. The next person who flies a drone over my house, you can come get it in pieces. Now, I've got 2 phone calls after that. One of them was from the sheriff's department saying, don't discharge a firearm in city limits. And I said, what are you going to do to me if I do? And the second one was, don't shoot my drone down. No, that never came, except the drone never showed back up. So another news bit that came out over the weekend, Trump refused to sign the G7 statement on Iran, and he wants a total end to nuclear enrichment. From Breitbart News, and I quote, President Donald Trump rejected the G7's proposed statement on Iran because it called for monitoring of Iran's nuclear activities rather than an outright halt to Iran's program of nuclear enrichment. The Trump administration has been demanding that Iran halt all uranium enrichment since enrichment past a certain level has no purpose other than developing the unique isotope necessary for nuclear weapons. Iran has refused to agree, leading to the impasse in the nuclear talks and leading Israel to attack Iran last Friday, rather than, I guess it was 2 Fridays ago now, rather than face the prospect of an imminent Iranian nuclear weapon. So the Daily Telegraph reported that a draft document was circulated at the G7 that called for both sides to protect civilians and for tight monitoring of Iran's nuclear facilities. All right, so let's just kind of stop right there, because there's a huge amount of disagreement among conservatives about this issue of, all right, should they have a nuclear weapon? Shouldn't they? And Agent 29 brought up an interesting point before we started the show today, that we all believe in the Second Amendment, that we have a right to protect ourselves. So who are we to say that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon? Like, do we, do we have any moral authority right there? And I think for me, the crux of the argument comes down to the word moral. So Iran is a country that has repeatedly said death to America. I think it's probably a foregone conclusion that they do have some of their terrorist allies inside the United States. And as we speak, they're probably plotting some sort of terrorist attack. Iran is the chief sponsor of terror across the world. The Houthi rebels, Hamas, Hezbollah, all the Houthi rebels have been lobbing missiles at our ships. If that's not an act of war, I don't know what is. And I guess you could make the argument that, well, it's the Houthis over in Yemen. It's not Iran. Well, Iran is the benefactor to the Houthi rebels. So there has been aggressive action. Now, I'm not one of those that wants to jump into a war. I've never been in favor of wars. that have reasons that don't necessarily pan out in the end. I was totally in favor of kicking Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. Good job over there, Agent 29. However, I was pretty skeptical about the second Gulf War. There was a lot of messaging coming out of the Bush administration, that second Bush administration, that I don't think that necessarily panned out. Did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? I think that's probably true. Did we find them? No. The biggest problem I had is going into it, we were told, yep, they've got weapons of mass destruction. Yep, we know where they're at, and we're going after them. So I'm not in favor of wars with questionable objectives or no objectives at all. Afghanistan. We were there for 20 years. We spent, trillions of dollars on that. And thanks to the Biden administration, we gave all of our equipment and the bases and everything that we had worked for back to the Taliban. So there is a big spat going on between two sides of the conservative movement, and I think we could probably state that both sides are conservative. But one side says, hey, you're not America first if you're in favor of anything to do with Israel. And then you have the other side that says, no, wait a minute. Yeah, we should protect our allies. And this is from the New York Post. Trump refutes Tucker Carlson's criticism that he abandoned America first by supporting Israel. And before I go there, let's go ahead and play, let's see here, cut number 1.
You can have any opinion you want on Israel. I'm not actually that interested. I personally like Israel, whatever. The red line for me is, this is my country. My birthright is free speech. God gave me that right. And if you're telling me what I'm allowed to say in my country, you're my enemy. Like, it's just kind of that simple. You can't tell me what to say or think, period, because I'm an American.
You cannot enter a discussion with an Israel defender without them immediately accusing you of being a racist if they disagree with you. Oh, you're an anti-Semite. Try and have an argument. Criticize Israel just a little bit and count down the number of seconds before you get accused of being motivated by bigotry and hatred. Okay, and these are the people who say, oh, I hate the tactic of accusing.
That's the point that I wanted to get to right there. And I guess I should have cut that soundbite down a little bit, because basically they were talking about free speech, and both of those two, well, Carlson mainly, has taken a lot of flack for his stance that we shouldn't be anywhere involved in this conflict over in the Middle East. And truth is, we're already involved. I'm not saying that justifies anything. I'm just saying it's a fact. We already are involved. And Israel has a ton of our military equipment, probably, thousands of tons of our stuff over there. So, we're at the very least involved by proxy. Here's another piece that showed up in Breitbart, and this one is Marjorie Taylor Greene advocates for U.S. involvement in Israel-Iran wars are disgusting, not America first. And I quote, those who advocate for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war are disgusting and not America first, MTG says in a fiery anti-war tirade on X on Sunday morning. As the conflict between Israel and Iran escalates, the Georgia congresswoman took to social media to denounce any of these sort of claims. Quote, everyone is finding out, and I think, here we go. Here's part of that tweet. Everyone is finding out who are real America first MAGA people and who are fake. And just said it because it was popular. Unfortunately, the list of fakes are becoming quite long and exposing themselves quickly. Anyone slobbering for the U.S., okay, yeah, whatever. So this really is a question of isolationism versus, in my mind, leading in the world. And those are two different things. There's a lot of people who said that we can lead through just taking care of our own stuff, America first, all of that. But I'm not certain that the Monroe Doctrine applies all of that, all that much anymore. We have an increasingly interconnected world. Not saying we need to be involved in everything across the globe. Certainly, I don't think that we should be the world's policeman. However, we kind of need to face facts. And if that is if those are the cards that we're dealt, okay, I guess we play them to the best of our ability. But I mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, and basically what that said is that the U.S. will handle stuff in our hemisphere. and you guys over in the other hemisphere, you handle your own stuff, and never the twain shall, not never, but the two of them shouldn't really, get too involved in each other's crap.
The world was a lot smaller then.
Yes, it was.
And that's just one of those amazing things. I remember when I mentioned my friends that moved to South Africa. It used to be a big deal to get to speak to them.
Yeah.
And now I pick them up and wake them up in the middle of the night anytime I want.
Exactly right. So that's what I meant by the world has become increasingly interconnected. And it used to be, and this is a good example here. So it used to be that we had mutually assured destruction. We had nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. And the whole idea was that if one of them set off a nuke, well, then the other one was going to set off a nuke, and we'd both perish. And so that was the deterrence, right? If you want to destroy the world, well, fire off a nuke. That's what'll happen. And the idea was we'll create peace through our mutually assured destruction. Well, that still exists, but the difference now is there are a whole bunch of other ways that we could guarantee our mutual destruction. There is mutually assured economic destruction. Something happens on the other side of the globe economically with the Japan stock market, and it can absolutely have an effect the following morning in New York with the Dow Jones Industrial Average. If one country decides they're going to stop producing oil, it raises the price of oil for the rest of the globe. I mean, we see that here, right here in America. And so there are a lot of different ways that we are increasingly interconnected, and I'm not certain that the Monroe Doctrine really applies all that much anymore. And so I think that it is kind of, sort of Pollyannish, that it is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sophomoric to believe that we can be isolationist anymore. The truth is that a world without America is a pretty scary place. And it's a scary place already. But a world without America, without our influence overseas, I think creates a further depraved world. And here's what I mean by that. If you don't have America and America's support behind Israel, and I frankly, I think that Israel can take care of themselves. I mean, they have one of the best militaries on the face of the planet. But I think without the influence of the U.S. in several corners of the world, it becomes an increasingly chaotic and increasingly dangerous world, because a lot of countries don't act simply because we are who we say we are, and we do have the world's largest military and hopefully the world's most deadly military. So I don't think that isolationism really is realistic anymore. And those folks who are advocating that we just stay out of all wars, I really don't think that that's a possibility anymore. We're increasingly interconnected. We're connected economically, politically, socially, and certainly militarily. So I just don't think that that's something that's achievable.
I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole at this time, but your argument there is real similar to what Representative Sherwood was bringing up about a community and gun rights, and might make for an interesting discussion sometime.
Sure, certainly. Now, so here's the difference, right? I'm not saying that the world needs to be completely interconnected and we do everything that each other says we're going to do. What I'm saying is that the influence of America kind of keeps things, and I'm going to say on an even keel, but don't take that to extremes. What I mean is there are a lot of evil people across the world that don't act because of the possibility that we will.
Yeah, no, I get you. There are some similarities there, but there's also some fundamental differences that need to be. So you can't say that, for example, the United States and its actions are kind of like a red flag law to Iran.
Oh, yeah,
we want to go
totally.
Yeah, we want to go preemptively take away their weapons because of what they might do. Well, there are other ways that you can look at that. So sometime we'll have to get into that.
Certainly. Well, let's talk about Iran's nuclear program for a while. The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that Barack Obama set up, was a piece of crap. It guaranteed that Iran would have a nuclear weapon. So what would Iran do if they had a nuclear weapon? Well, they would launch 2 of them. Well, actually, they would have to have 2 nuclear weapons to do that. But if they had to, what would they do? Go to Israel? Go to the U.S.? That is what's happened because that is what they've promised.
Yeah, that's fundamentally part of it is you have to look at their track record. What have they done in the past? You go back, we were talking earlier in 1979 when they came and took hostages.
Yep.
They have said they're going to do these things. Anytime they had an opportunity, they've done them. I love the contrast in Israel and Iran fighting each other in this war. Israel makes precision bombings, takes out precisely whom they want, when they want, wherever they want. Iran just blows the crap out of anything they think they can hit.
Yeah. Now in philosophy, and this is a giant rabbit hole, which I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for online, but in philosophy there is this idea called just war theory. And it comes from, it's actually called Catholic just war theory. But the idea is there are some wars that are justified because of the actions of another. And you might argue that if the question is protecting yourself or your family, then you're absolutely justified. I'm not saying that you don't have to pay the consequences for it, but I'm saying that it's justified. And here's the other part of it too, that a country is free to do what they want. However, there are consequences with whatever you do. The whole idea that and let's just bring this back home and give you an easy U.S. example. You often hear people say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, that's a bunch of bull crap. You can yell fire in a crowded theater if you want, but if somebody gets hurt, you are responsible. Similarly, in Wyoming, you can carry a concealed weapon anywhere you want. You don't have to have a permit. But if you use your concealed weapon, you are responsible for where that bullet eventually goes and where it ends up. If you hit another person, well, that's your responsibility because you chose to use that weapon. And so similarly, when we talk about countries, they are free to act however they want to act, but there are consequences to that. And if you are the country that is repeatedly saying things like death to Israel, death to the great Satan, that's us, by the way, well, I think we should take them at their word. Now, I'm not in favor of getting involved in a land war in Iran. Yeah, Agent 29 is laughing because he's thinking of the Princess Bride. There's 2 truths. Never get involved in a land war in Asia. What's the other one?
Don't mess with a Sicilian when death is on the line.
Yes, there you go. We need that soundbite. But Vicini. So my point is that I'm not in favor of a war, but I am one of those people that thinks when it's time to go, it's time to go, and we absolutely should do that. So that being as it is, take it or leave it, whatever you want. It's time to go. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Maryland Man again. There's some fun stuff that's come up about him. Turns out he's not such a nice guy.
U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live, Wyoming's #1 podcast. Welcome back to the show, my friends. It's a Tuesday, and we've almost burned up another busy broadcast 2 hours. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. Go ahead and give me a call if you want to. So the Maryland man. Oh, such a nice guy. You know, he's definitely not an MS-13 gangbanger, and he's such a nice guy. I mean, he's not a human trafficker. Oh, wait, no. Apparently he is. Suspected MS-13 gangbanger Abrego Garcia possibly earned $100,000 a year smuggling illegal immigrants across the United States. And I quote, and I think this one's from the New York Post, the suspected MS-13 gangbanger Garcia was paid up to $1,500 per smuggling trip and may have raked in more than $100,000 annually trafficking humans, including minors. The new details about Abrego Garcia's alleged full-time job come from co-conspirators and witnesses cooperating with the federal government's human smuggling case against the Salvadoran national, who was wrongly deported in March. I don't think he was wrongly deported. But anyway, the allegations were shared by a federal agent during a Friday detention hearing in a Nashville court, where Abrego Garcia entered a plea of not guilty. Of course he did. The human smuggling charges against Abrego Garcia stem from a 2022 traffic stop in Tennessee, where he was pulled over driving a vehicle with 9 passengers. As part of the illegal operation, smugglers charged migrants from Central and South America $8,000 for passage into the U.S. And Abrego Garcia would pick them up in Texas and transport them across the U.S. So he's such a nice guy. I mean, how could we possibly ever throw him in a jail and deport him? I mean, why would you do that? I mean, take him away from his family and all. Take him away from his employment. Well, I mean, what is his employer going to do? You take away his right-hand man, and well, anyway, you're probably tired of hearing my sound bites. Agent 29 over there.
Well, you can say that again.
Oh, stop. What do you got over there?
So there's another guy in the news, this one in Minnesota.
Oh, this guy.
And I think it bears paying a little bit of attention to how the media presents him, who he is. So this is a soundbite from a podcast called The Liberty Daily.
Okay.
And it's somebody that I would be interested in maybe reaching out to. It might be an interesting guest, vice versa.
Okay.
I don't think she's number 33.
Probably not, but that's okay. We'll talk to her anyway.
Yeah, here she is.
So as many of you know, I have this uncanny ability to hunt down information about people. And one of the things that I consistently hunt down is voter registration and voter information. What a lot of people do not realize is that every state is different. Some states have closed primaries and some states have open primaries. And when you look up voter registration in some states, it'll tell you someone's party affiliation, or
Like
it won't tell their affiliation whatsoever. It'll just say whether they're registered to vote or not. Minnesota is one of those states that does not tell you the party affiliation of a registered voter. As you can see here, Minnesota does not register voters by party affiliation.
Weird.
There's no party declaration, and they have an open primary system. So would someone like to explain to me why the mainstream media is straight up lying to people? Despite serving under Democratic governors, Bolter last registered to vote in 2022 as a Republican, according to New York Post. New York Post and Newsweek, shame on you. This is exactly why I do what I do. Because the mainstream media is full of shit, and independent journalism is where it's at.
There we go. Well done, Agent 29. That's right. So the mainstream media lies to you. And as aptly pointed out by this Liberty podcast, it's pretty hard to tell who this guy is or which party he was registered as. However, I think we could probably say that since he was appointed by Tampon Tim Walz, that he's probably not a conservative, and there's a good chance he's not a Republican. I don't see Tim Walz as the guy that's going to appoint a Republican to anything, or anybody with a brain to anything. I mean, it is Tampon Tim Walz, after all.
I was watching pictures from all of the protests and just thinking about, well, one of the things you do in the National Guard, which I served in for a short time, is you do training on how to suppress an uprising or how to try to maintain peace.
Yeah.
And I want to play one more for you, and then we'll do whatever it is you want to do.
Well, that is my show.
It is, but I co-opt it now and then.
Okay,
Thanks
fair
for
enough.
that. So in Florida, Brevard County Sheriff had about a 3 or 4 minute thing, but I pared it down. This is only about 54 seconds.
Okay.
But I want to get your reaction to what he had to say.
All right.
If you resist lawful orders, you're going to jail. Let me be very clear about that. If you block an intersection or a roadway in Brevard County, you are going to jail. If you flee arrest, you're going to go to jail tired because we are going to run you down and put you in jail. If you try to mob rule a car in Brevard County, gathering around it, refusing to let the driver leave, in our county, you're most likely going to get run over and dragged across the street. If you spit on us, you're going to the hospital and in jail. If you hit one of us, you're going to the hospital and jail, and most likely get bitten by one of our big, beautiful dogs that we have. If you throw a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you graveyard dead. We're not going to play.
I like that guy. He is right up my alley. But we have got to get back to a place where we are enforcing the law. Like everything that he mentioned is absolutely the law. I mean, now I don't know about, okay, so if you point a gun at a cop, that's a pretty easy way to engage in suicide.
Now that just happened in Casper.
Yeah, it did. Yep. So all of those things that he mentioned, you could sum them all up by saying, we are going to enforce the law, period. And for so long, we have lived in a society where it doesn't really matter what law you break. Well, I mean, if you're a conservative and you break any law, you're going to jail. But if you happen to be a protesting liberal that's throwing things downtown, you may not have to get prosecuted at all. In fact, we'll probably just not even book you. But I think that's exactly correct. And that's the sheriff. That's the sheriff's job, is to enforce the law. He is the number one elected official in any county. And it's I just wish more sheriffs would be like that. Our own sheriff here in Sheridan County, I am not a fan of him at all, whatsoever. So anyway, I really like that guy.
I thought you would.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a few minutes left in the show. We got about 10 minutes to go. And if you want to be part of the program, if you want to opine about something we've been talking about, go ahead and give me a call. So there was and you know what? I don't even want to go there. Let's do this. So Sean Duffy, who is the transportation secretary, he says that for sanctuary cities, you're not going to get 1 red cent to repair infrastructure that's been damaged by rioters. And this is another case of if you make your own choices, you deal with the consequences, whether you're an individual or if you are a state. From Breitbart News, and I quote, rogue state actors will forfeit their Department of Transportation funding if they do not comply with federal immigration enforcement efforts. So that first sentence needs a little bit of history behind it. When the federal government wants a state to do something and that state is reticent to comply, usually the first thing they go after is your highway funds. And the reason we know this is it has happened repeatedly in the Cowboy state. The first one that comes to mind is raising of the drinking age. Wyoming didn't want to do that. They went from 19 to 21. And Wyoming said, no, we're not going to do that. And so the federal government said, well, we'll take away your highway funding until you do. Okay, well, obviously we complied. Another case was with wolves. Wyoming did not want to leave wolves on the endangered list. And so the federal government said, we'll take away your highway funding. And
when they first trotted out the interstate system, we wanted to paint all the stripes yellow.
Oh, yeah, I remember this
so that
one
you
now.
could actually see them in the snow. The federal government said, no, we want everything to be the same everywhere. May not work for you as well as it does for us. If you paint your stripes yellow, we will take away your funding.
Yeah, which is a dumb decision, man. How often have you been trapped in a snowstorm on the interstate and you don't know where? Like the only way that you know you're like actually on the road is the rumble strip.
And how many people out there driving actually understand what the yellow line means versus the white line, or the yellow reflector post versus the white line? You know, we know that it means traffic's coming in another direction beyond that yellow line. But if you ask people that directly,
I have no idea.
I don't think so.
You know, that brings up an interesting point. You know, recently I visited Jackson more than I have in the past. I just got some friends over there, and the lovely Christine and I went to a concert over there recently. And the one thing I can say for Jackson is they have you'll notice it right out, a redeeming quality. The people in Jackson know how to operate a four-way stop. It is absolutely true. You go anywhere else in Wyoming, nobody has a clue, man. You pull up to this four-way stop and everybody's pointing and motioning you on. And I mean, it's like nobody ever takes driver's ed anymore. Well, evidently they do in Jackson. So anyway, highway funds getting yanked if you're not paying attention to the immigration laws. Rightfully so, man. I am so sick of all these states just doing whatever they want to do, and just completely violating the law all over the place. What you got, Angel 29?
Well, you mentioned Duffy. And you mentioned whether there is a sound
yeah. I do have a sound. See, yeah. I'm just out of sorts here.
I'm looking out for you. Here's the sound bite, folks.
We have what is called
push pause
law. So
this sound bite is before this Sanctuary City one. So the reason I have it here is to show you that this is not something that's new. This is something that we've done in the past. So go ahead and play Sean Duffy.
We have what is called follow the law. So we have so many states and municipalities that don't follow the law. So whether it's DEI, discriminating against Americans, whether they give illegals driver's license, or their sanctuary cities or states, if you don't follow the law, if you're giving license to illegals, if you're having DEI policies, we're not going to fund your projects. So you got to certify in your state or in your city to get road and bridge money or rail money that you're actually following the law, which includes the executive orders from you, Mr. President. We're cutting back funding. We send research money, Mr. President, to universities to do research on more equitable and sustainable transportation systems. Projects that'll use data and public opinion to inform policy and infrastructure and technology benefiting diverse communities, including women and gender non-conforming people. Just stupid waste of money.
Okay, so exactly right. There's been a number of executive orders that said, hey, we're not going to do this DEI crap anymore. And if whatever department you're talking about falls within the executive branch, and most of them do, by the way, the BLM, the Forest Service, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. Those are all under the executive department, or the executive branch, I should say. And that's the people that executive orders apply to. To use Harriet Hageman's explanation, she can tell her staff that they're going to capitalize the first letter of every sentence. And that directive applies to her entire staff. Now, she can't tell another congressperson's staff to do the exact same thing because they fall under a different congressperson, a different branch. Well, everything that is from the president on down in the executive branch gets to follow his executive orders because I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but he's the boss. And so that's where those executive orders apply. Well, we've pretty much burned up another busy broadcast hour on the program. Keep it tuned to Cowboy State Politics every Tuesday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m., and that'll about do it. We got anything else, Agent 29?
Oh, yeah, but we're out of time. I got to go play.
Okay, fine. I got to go play, too. I've got stuff to do. So, for now, from the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson. This is Cowboy State Politics. We'll see you tomorrow.